Today, I'll be talking about how Hoodwinked is the best portrayal of the importance of perspective in media. First, let's get into what perspective actually is. So, according to Britannica, perspective is the way of thinking or understanding something. So, if you don't get every perspective, like with a situation, you will never get the full story, and there will be gaps in the timeline, whether that be in a real life situation, in a movie, a show, kind of thing. And getting all the perspectives of a situation is also important to weed out any lies based on how things match up. You may be thinking, yeah, this is cool and all, but like, what does this have to do with Hoodwinked? Or you may not even know what Hoodwinked is. Um, Hoodwinked is, all in all, an anime movie based on the story of Little Red Riding Hood, which I would assume everyone knows. Obviously, because I'm going to be talking about the movie kind of in depth, there will be spoilers for the movie if you haven't seen it yet. And I would say watch it before or after, it doesn't matter, because there are details I will be leaving out. So, but it's a good watch, so I recommend it. But basically, someone is going around and is stealing all the recipes for goodies in the town, and it is a whodunit from the narration of a police investigation. The whole premise is that the original story we all know isn't actually the full story, which is where my point of perspective being incredibly important comes into play. The character of Little Red Riding Hood, who we're going to be referring to as Red as this movie states, Red's story is the first story that is told to investigators, so it is the first story that we see. We hear about her perspective of people's recipes being stolen and her journey to her granny's house, where she encounters her bunny friend. While riding a monorail with the bunny, her and her basket fall out and into the woods. She encounters the wolf in these woods, whose name is Wolf, which I'll be referring to, who starts acting a little weird about her grandma's recipes and goodies, kind of in the stereotypical way that we see in the original story, in a more like predatory wolf way. She goes to a goat's house on the way.
Everything?
That's right.
You just talked! Just now!
Oh, did I? 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 Did I?
And calls her granny, who tells her not to come and sounds more like she's in distress to Red. Her and the goat go on a mine cart, like to go to her granny's house, that gets derailed, and as she's flying through the air, her granny is seen coming through the clouds and tells her to use the hood. She eventually makes it to her granny's house and finds the wolf in the house with her granny, tied up in the closet. Then an axe-wielding woodsman jumps through the window, screaming and waving the axe around. Now, from this perspective, it can be inferred that the wolf is the bad guy who wants to, for lack of a better word, kill Granny, kill Red, take the goodies, and the recipes, obviously. But the detective interrogating Red insists to hear from the others, much to the police officers with him, their, displeasure in that scenario. Wolf then goes to tell his side of the story. We figure out that he is actually an investigative journalist, and he was reporting on the stolen goodies, and Red was his main suspect. So he ended up following her with his little squirrel friend, and confronted her in the woods, and she fought him and fled. He ended up getting directions from the bunny on how to get to Granny's house so he could catch her committing the crime of supplying Granny with the stolen recipes. He and his squirrel companion ended up in a minecart, and the squirrel lit up dynamite, thinking it was a candle because, it was dark in the tunnel. Wolf saw that and was like, yo, that is dynamite, and started throwing them out behind them as they were, leaving the tunnel. And so they wouldn't blow up. Thus, it blew up the tracks that Red ended up flying over. When he ended up getting to Granny's house, no one was there, so he pretended to be her to catch Red. And in doing so, he threw the squirrel in the closet to hide the squirrel from Red, so Red didn't know that it wasn't her granny. But she figured it out anyways, obviously. Then they fought. Granny jumped out of the closet all tied up, and the axe-wielding woodsman jumped through the window screaming and waving his axe around. While the story clears up some obvious misconceptions and explains them meeting in the woods, why he was acting so weird about the recipes, the track blowing up, the track not being there. It also leaves questions like, who is the axe-wielding man and why is he here? Who tied up Granny and put her in the closet? And who is trying to steal the recipes? Okay, while we still don't have those questions answered, we move on to the next interrogation with the woodsman we find out is named Kirk. So, Kirk is an actor, like an amateur actor, and he was auditioning for this commercial and he bombed it. And it was a commercial of a woodsman for foot cream, I think. And instead he goes to his day job, which is driving a schnitzel truck and giving kids schnitzel. So he does a little musical number,
Make sure you keep an extra one for later in your later holes.
And he comes back to find his truck completely ransacked. And as he's upset because he's gonna lose his job and he didn't make the audition, the bunny is there and talks to him and is like, it would just be so great if, you could just work for someone else with a big company, And before Kurt can, mull over that, he gets a call, and he answers it, and it is actually a callback for the audition. And they tell him that he needs to, brush up, because his audition was not the best. So then he runs to the woods to chop trees and channel his inner woodsman for this audition. And as he's chopping down tons and tons of trees, he finds a huge tree and starts chopping it down while we're saying the lines and stuff. And then he hears a girl scream, so he kind of walks away from the tree and walks towards the house, which is Granny's house. And the tree falls and starts rolling down this big hill after him as he's running away from it so he doesn't get crushed. And he ends up kind of on top of the tree, circus running down it. I don't know how to really explain it. And with the axe still in his hand, and he crashes through the window with the axe in his hand, screaming, because what did he just go through? The detectives sit there and realize this man knows absolutely nothing about the recipes or any of this. So they consider that Granny, of all people, must be the thief, because it's not Kirk, it's not the wolf, it's not Red. So there's only one more person left to interrogate, so it must be her. So in the beginning of the interrogation, the police that are along with the investigator detective guy, they go into the closet that Granny jumped out of and find a bunch of trophies and medals of extreme sports that Granny won. So when going to also look in the closet while feigning ignorance, like Granny was going to the closet, the detective points out the 3 G's that are tattooed on the back of Granny's neck. Granny then admits to doing extreme sports and hiding it because her family is very overprotective. And she explains that day she had originally tried to deter Red from coming up to see her because she was going to compete in a competition that she has been training for months, the Extreme Dream Snow Sports competition, and didn't want Red to know about the dangerous sports. So when Granny is there at the sports thing, the bunny goes there and gets Granny's autograph saying like, oh, like, just write it out to your for your biggest fan, Boingo. So his name is Boingo, so that's what we'll be referring to him as for the rest of the video. So the competition starts with her little group versus another group, and she starts skiing down the mountain in the competition. And she was skiing when Red called her for the second time, which is when she called from the goat's house. Her team member got pushed down by an opponent, so she quickly ended the call to get him, which explains the distress that Red heard. Granny started snowboarding down the mountain while dodging snowballs, and as Granny ends up getting like pushed by the opponent and is like dangling off the cliff. And while she is dangling off this cliff, her opponent is holding her up, and she asks him who he works for. And he says that he can't tell her that, like that he works for the bandit. And when she asks who the bandit is, he pushes her off the cliff and lets her go. And then he like pulls out a walkie-talkie and says that Granny's taken care of, and that to go after the red-hooded girl next. And then the camera pans down and we see Granny holding onto a little branch on the side of the mountain. So she heard all of that. So she ends up bungee jumping off the side of the mountain, and which catapults her back up onto the course. She then uses these explosives to throw them back and cause an avalanche, and snowboards past the, now we know as, assassins that were trying to kill her and Red. This explains an avalanche that was going down after Red, the goat, Wolf, and the squirrel, while they were all in the mine carts flying through the air, going around. The assassins get overtaken in the avalanche, and she ends up winning the race and parachutes off the course to get away from the avalanche. This is when, in her parachute, she goes through the clouds and tells Red,
Granny?
Use the hood, Red! Use the hood!
and soars away to her little house. And this explains what Red saw in the clouds, which could be assumed at first that it's probably like an illusion or something, that she's remembering what her grandma said, but in reality it's just her grandma up above the clouds floating around. So Granny ended up landing through her chimney, and her parachute got caught in her ceiling fan, which spun her all around, made her get tied up all in the string, and it launched her into the closet. Right after that, the wolf comes in and unknowingly throws the squirrel into the closet right on Granny's head when Red comes in. She then used the squirrel to break down the door and jump out, and then Kirk jumped through the window, screaming, wielding the axe. This answers about everything pretty much, except we still don't know who this goody bandit is. And it seems like either people are lying or there's still something missing. So at this point, Granny and Red end up like arguing and stuff, and Red promptly leaves, taking off her hood and dropping it because she doesn't know who she is anymore, because like her whole life has been doing the goodie business with her granny. So, but anyways, the detective starts accusing Kirk of being the bandit, but Kirk points out that he was stolen from too, so he's also a victim. And then the detective accuses Granny, but then was like, or she could just be another victim of a hungry wolf. Which promptly makes him accuse the wolf, who stated that he was only following Red. Then the detective accuses Red, who left during being upset. So, during this time, though, someone in her red cape took the recipe that this cop was like holding, because it was still in a little basket that she was carrying around, like, you know, the iconic little basket. And then the detective points out that Boingo, the bunny, was in every single one of their stories. Then they all ended up fighting him, ended up saving the day. If you'd like to know how it actually happened, you should kind of watch the movie yourself, you know. Boingo ends up singing a little song. It's a whole big thing. Now that I'm done rambling about all the different sides, you hopefully haven't gotten lost along the way. But without perspectives and listening to all the other different ones, they would have never solved the case and caught the bandit. And we, as viewers of this movie, would have never really understood truly what happened and how they figured that out. We wouldn't have known the real story. We would have just assumed the wolf is the one that's trying to steal the recipes, because that is all we saw from Red's perspective. So all in all, who really saved the day? It wasn't Granny, or Red, or Kirk, the detective, Wolf, the squirrel, definitely not Boingo. It wasn't even the singing goat that has a singing spell cast on him. Yeah, that's in the movie, that happens. What really truly saved the day was perspective. Yeah. It was perspective. Because if they didn't have this perspective, like I said, they wouldn't have known anything. We wouldn't have known anything. They would not have solved the case. And they would all be working for Boingo in one big factory where he is in charge. So, perspective is incredibly important in a narrative style and in real-world situations. Always listen to all sides of the story before you make assumptions and your opinion.